An Inuit leader says Prime Minister Mark Carney has offered reassurances plans for major projects won't violate modern treaties. This comes amid Carney's push to assure Indigenous leaders there will be full consultation on major projects.
It fully respects treaty-based environmental assessment processes. In fact, those will be essential for anything that we move forward.
The Prime Minister, several cabinet ministers and Inuit leaders met yesterday to discuss the bill. Carney held a similar summit with First Nations chiefs earlier this month, where some walked away calling it political theater. So how was he able to reassure Inuit leadership? Natan Obed is the president of the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, and he's back from those meetings, and he joins me here in studio. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Great to see you too.
So I was actually reading through some of your Senate testimony in June about this bill, and it's definitely a different tone, I think, than what I think you're going to tell me about tonight. You were saying to the senators that the Prime Minister's nation-building legislation, C5, you said it could infringe on Inuit Crown treaties. You said it could lead to litigation, and you were concerned about, hastily passing extremely complicated legislation like this. But after your meeting with the Prime Minister, he seems to have reassured you. What did he tell you to bring you on side?
Well, first and foremost, the criticism stands on the process of the legislation, but now the legislation is passed, and we have to deal with the ramifications of its implementation. The meeting we had in Inuvik was within the Inuit Crown partnership process, and we were able to hear directly from the Prime Minister and the associated ministers who were responsible for the implementation of C5 about how that would proceed. The Prime Minister was unequivocal that our modern treaties and the processes within them, environmental assessment and other regulatory co-mechanism or institutions of public government, would be the platforms for any nation-building projects. The question remains about how do any of our projects get on this initial list, and also what sort of incentives are there, whether they be fiscal or otherwise, to ensure that we can work with the government on these nation-building projects.
One of the criticisms of the bill, as you just said, you stand by that criticism that the consultations for the actual legislation were wholly inadequate. Do you feel, especially on such a crucial piece of legislation that will have an impact on territories you represent, do you feel like the Prime Minister has now meaningfully engaged with you and other Inuit leaders after having sat down with you yesterday and gone through the legislation and made those reassurances?
Absolutely. We are very fortunate as Inuit to have modern treaties, or comprehensive land claim agreements, that are foundational in the way in which any government or any natural resource project goes ahead. These are constitutionally protected agreements. We also have the security of the Interpretation Act and the non-derogation clause that was passed in the last government that says no new legislation can abrogate or derogate from the Government of Canada's existing treaty rights and obligations. So I would imagine that not only is the Prime Minister willing to work with us through our processes, but also has received pretty clear guidance from the Department of Justice that there's really no other way.
I like the word guidance. I think that's maybe a stronger word could be used there. I know some Indigenous leaders kind of bristle at this idea of a veto. I mean, we kind of use that terminology, and it's not necessarily accurate as to what transpires when considering a project. But do you feel like Inuit should have a veto of sorts over projects that are built on your territory?
Well, our modern treaties give us this right. And I would say that across this country, in provinces and territories, every single session, legislatures give veto to projects every day or every session. Sure. So the idea that Indigenous people somehow are a threat to the nation state by being able to say no, I'd say is a scare tactic and a misnomer. We will proceed the way that we proceed with any proposal. The good thing about Inuit Nunangat and our structure is that, say, in Nunavut, the projects that are being pushed as nation-building projects and hopefully will be in the listed projects are Inuit-led projects, and in some cases, the subsurface is owned by Inuit, so any developments that would happen would greatly benefit our communities. The complexity across this country between Inuit First Nations and Métis is not ours. It has been created. We just have to live with it. And fortunately, in this moment in time, Inuit are in a very good place to work with the government on these nation-building projects and have processes in place to be able to do that.
Yeah, like when we talk about C5, there's a huge focus on pipelines, right? We're talking frequently about what's going to be built to the West Coast or what have you. But it's not just about pipelines, right? We're talking about nation-building projects that include mines, ports, railways, roads, what have you, right? Some of the things that you mentioned there. I mean, can you give us some more detail in terms of what the Inuit are pitching? I know that you have said in the past that you've identified dozens of potential projects that could make it onto this list, some infrastructure initiatives that you said would be helpful to the Inuit. Give us a sense of what you're talking about you'd like Carney to include.
Well, at the meeting, we talked about a list that we prepared of 79 projects, totaling about $30 billion over the next 10 years, that we see as essential infrastructure builds for the type of rhetoric that the government and the Prime Minister have been using. We can scale that down to approximately 10 to 15 projects that would meet at least 4 of the 5 criteria within the legislation. Further to that, I'll just use, say, the Kivalliq Hydro Fiber Link project that would run from Manitoba up through the central region of Nunavut. That would bring a fiber link for connectivity. It would also bring cheaper, and cleaner power alternatives to diesel generation that we have today. It would be transformative in the way that we could imagine sustainability for our communities, and also it would bring prosperity in that it would be a reliable source of power to any natural resource extraction project or other project moving forward.
So you've worked with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now you've just had this day-long meeting with Carney. How do you compare the two?
Well, that's a fascinating question. You know, we did a lot of work with the previous Prime Minister. You know, the reconciliation agenda that he led was instrumental in a lot of the progress that we've made over the last 10 years. Prime Minister Carney is cut from a different cloth from the way he does his business, and also the business that he's been in the last 10 years. So at our meeting yesterday, you know, we've got to really brush up on the terminology used in global finance and from an economist based, but at the same time we're getting back to the same principles of how do we build together, how do we support reconciliation, and I think both of those individuals at their heart want to work with Indigenous people, and in our case with the Inuit, for the betterment of Inuit and also the betterment of Canada. But I will say, it is a stark contrast, but that's not a slight on one or the other. The previous Prime Minister was gregarious and outgoing and wanted to shake everybody's hand in the room. This Prime Minister wants to get into the weeds of the very specifics of the work and is friendly, but perhaps doesn't lead with that gregarious charm in the same way.
That's some good insight. Thank you. All right, we'll leave it there. Natan, Obed, President of the ITK. Nice to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, great to be here.
After a